And it is 6 o'clock. Welcome aboard, everyone, to the after dinner, not so safe, not always Sunday brunch space hosted by the Voice of San Francisco. Uh, Tonight we have a lot of special guests. We've got Gina and Jackie from Mothers Against Drug Addiction and Deaths. And we have a last bit of kind of a surprise special guest that we're going to start up with, San Francisco District 6 Supervisor Matt Dorsey. He is on to talk about his new legislation, which is going to be before the Public Safety and Neighborhood Services Committee at City Hall this Thursday. This is basically going to be an ordinance that changes the city policy to establish the cessation of illicit drug use and attainment of long-term recovery from substance use disorders as the primary objective of the city's drug policy. Mm-hmm. And right now, those of you who have been following the story will know that there is a bit of a conflict going on between different partisans on what direction our policy should be going towards. For a long time, our policies have been governed by, or at least sort of dominated, I would say, more by a harm reduction type policy. And Supervisor Dorsey wants to really bring in recovery as more of a focus. He's got some serious institutional opposition, as we sort of exposed, was it a couple of weeks ago or 2 weeks ago, where we released that recording of a deputy director at DHS talking to colleagues about what they had to do to fight for harm reduction and fight abstinence, etc.
Right.
Yeah. So, Supervisor, why don't you talk more about it and what you're hoping will happen on Thursday? And if this passes the committee, will this be heard by the full board next week or the week after?
I think it would be heard by, I'm not putting it out as a committee report. So it would go out the week following it'll be Thursday, and then it would skip the next Tuesday, and then it would go to the board at the following Tuesday after that. So the genesis of this really started back in January. I went to an overdose prevention summit that was sponsored by the Department of Public Health, and it was very much focused around harm reduction. And I want to really make clear from the outset that I support harm reduction services, and in fact, my support for this goes back to 2011 when Dennis Herrera was running for mayor, and I was working for Dennis, and I made the strongest case I could for why Dennis should support what were then called safe injection facilities. I think with the advent of more smokable drugs, that became supervised consumption sites. But there is evidence that these are approaches that work well in European cities, and I have supported harm reduction as something that we should be doing. Where I see an erosion in public support for harm reduction is people are legitimately starting to wonder if this is all we're aspiring to. And I have had conversations with people at the Department of Public Health and in the mayor's office that for the people I talk to about harm reduction, they're hearing it in the way they might hear, a proposal to change our education policy into ignorance reduction. It's just this lowballism, let's do the least possible thing, that is losing public support. What I heard at the Overdose Prevention Summit was a lot of advocacy that wasn't really about public health, but was more about drug decriminalization, including some things that I think are actually harmful to the cause of recovery. Now, I have been transparent about my own journey in recovery from drug addiction and alcoholism, and this is the reason I sought a job I never thought I would want, let alone have. But I was very transparent when I asked for this job, first from Mayor Breed and then from voters, that the reason I want this is because I want to bring a voice and a perspective from the recovery community, and I want everybody who struggles with addiction or alcoholism to have access to the same chance at recovery I had. So this has really been work that's close to my heart. The reason I thought a recovery first aspirational policy statement would be important is to get everybody rowing in the same direction, to something that the San Francisco Department of Public Health already does. 100% of the drug treatment programs offered by SFDPH and funded by them are to get people off of illicit drugs. Now, it's important to understand that I am defining illicit as, abstinence rather, as abstinence from illicit drugs. So that means that medication-assisted treatment is included in your abstaining from illicit street drugs, which is a common sense, and I think this is factually supported public health outcome that we should be going for. I didn't think it was going to be that controversial. I did think it would be helpful to get everybody on the same page and rowing in the same direction as a policy aspiration, in much the way that Transit First animated our urbanist vision. It didn't ban cars, but it certainly did say, listen, we're a transit first city, and this is what we should be aspiring to. A drug recovery first policy would get us going in the same direction and make this less about drug decriminalization and more about public health. And I think it would hopefully win more hearts and minds from San Franciscans about what we're endeavoring to do on drug policy.
Interesting. Yeah. I think just you mentioned transit policy in passing, and one of the first observations that I've had about this, there seems to be a political pattern in San Francisco that there's a public policy establishment that follows behind one approach, and when someone else tries to bring in another approach, even if it's been peer reviewed and proven to work, there's this wall of limited good response with a limited good type attitude where we can't start doing multiple approaches for some reason. I'm not sure what motivates that.
My sense is that some of the people in the harm reduction world right now feel like they're playing defense. Mm-hmm. What I have said in my conversations publicly and privately is if the goal of harm reduction is public health objectives, you should be looking at the Recovery First policy statement as the political cover to justify that, of course, we're aspiring to something more than this. The fact that I'm seeing the opposition that I'm seeing, much of it really this sort of absurd parade of terribles that this is going to mark a profound rejection of the status quo, and it isn't, that it's going to achieve all these undesirable ends in terms of what it's going to do away with, when it's only it's just a statement of policy. Tells me why we need a unifying North Star and everybody that we all have to work for. To me, the opposition to this is making the case for why this is needed. What I have observed in my years of working in City Hall and working in this realm is that harm reduction services tend to attract people who are really invested in drug decriminalization and a lot of the issues that are sort of peripheral to public health. And this is a foot in the door to talk about that, to advocate for drug decriminalization or drug legalization. That is certainly the case. To me, it was no accident that the leading opponent of the Recovery First ordinance was the Drug Policy Alliance, which was the driving advocate for Oregon's Measure 110, which has been virtually universally acknowledged as a drug policy failure, that the Oregon legislature, super majorities of the Democratic Party in both houses of the Oregon legislature repealed last year. But on every measure, drug overdose deaths, traffic accidents, the uptake of in terms of people getting into recovery, there wasn't a good thing that happened from this other than that fewer people were getting arrested. And if that's what they were going for, that succeeded. But it ended up driving a drug overdose spike. It ended up driving, significant expansions in unsheltered homelessness. And a deterioration of street conditions. It was, I think, close to 2/3 of the Oregon population that were measured in two separate surveys blamed Measure 110 for making homelessness worse, crime worse, and drug overdoses worse. So when people are saying this is causing problems in my community, and you're seeing that from across the Oregon electorate, the writing was on the wall that this was a failed drug decriminalization experiment. It didn't do what it said it was going to do in terms of helping people get into recovery. In fact, it turned out that fewer than 1% of the people who benefited from Measure 110 funding, which was funded by marijuana taxation, got into long-term recovery, compared to 60% of people who were beneficiaries of harm reduction services. Now, again, I'm not against harm reduction, but when you're selling a measure as a treatment and recovery ballot measure, and that's what people supported it to do, and then you find out that fewer than 1% went into recovery or went into treatment, it obviously fell short, and that's why the public support for Measure 110 just collapsed.
May I ask a question, actually? Sure. Speaking of public support, do you feel that there is a change, sort of a zeitgeist change in San Francisco regarding how people are viewing harm reduction and recovery first? And do you sense a transition?
So when I asked Mayor Breed to consider me as her appointment to the Board of Supervisors, when Matt Haney was elected to the Assembly, I remember thinking that I would have a lot of work to do to connect illicit drug use and public drug use to all the things that were bothering people about the direction of their city. And what I learned very quickly after I was appointed and started running for supervisor was that, at least in District 6, the voters were already there. They understood that most of the problems that they are upset about, whether it's retail theft or street conditions or homelessness or just a kind of ambient level of public disorder related to people acting out in their addictions, I think everybody understood that if we could make progress on just one thing, getting more people into recovery and off of illicit drugs, that one thing would make progress on a lot of things. I thought I was going to have to sell that line of argument, and actually, I think people were already there. So what I would say, and this is sort of a long-winded way of answering your question, I think what's changing is that drug policy is a more prominent thing that San Franciscans are paying attention to. For years, this was a peripheral thing, and like I mentioned, the 2011 mayor's race, not many people were really talking seriously about supervised consumption sites back in 2011. I think C.W. Nevius had a couple columns on it back in the day when he was writing, but it wasn't the prominent issue that it is. Today, drug policy is a very prominent issue, if not the number one issue. It's closely related to it.
I just have a quick question. How do you think the San Francisco Department of Public Health fits in? The story I wrote about the secret recording that I obtained that was all about harm reduction, not a word about recovery, where they described recovery as dangerous, where Dr. Coonan said, as a progressive, she supports basically only harm reduction. How do you think that's going to work with this, if this is something that is enacted?
You know, my observation, both in policy circles and as a person in recovery, you know, who goes to meetings regularly, and this is an important part of my life, I think the recovery community is much more inclusive of harm reduction than some of the harm reduction advocates are of recovery. And I have voiced that disappointment to some people in public health, including around this. As I said, I think if people were really thinking through what this ordinance will do, or what assurance it will provide to the San Franciscans whose money we're spending, I think they would realize, like, hey, this is doing us a favor. And by the way, when you're giving out harm reduction supplies, at the end of the day, wouldn't you wish for the person you're serving what you would wish for a loved one or family member who's struggling with addiction? Of course we want you to get sober. If you're not ready for that, then we can help you use drugs more safely. But at the end of the day, this isn't a great life. And anybody who has struggled with addiction knows that. I think for those of us who have been through it, and for me, it's been, I've had most of my adult life in recovery, and I've had setbacks along the way. I look back now with gratitude that somebody pulled me out of this, and that there were people in my life who weren't going to take it anymore and really confronted me with some of the bad choices that I was making. I was lucky to have insurance and a social network that was there for me. For many people who are here, especially people who are arriving here from other cities, many of them don't have that. And it may be that the services that we offer, whether it's harm reduction supplies or their interventions that they may have through the criminal justice systems, that may be the last chance that they've got. So I really do appreciate what Mayor Lurie's administration is doing to make sure that if we're going to be providing these harm reduction supplies, and we should, and I support it, including safe smoking supplies, we should also be encouraging people to be aware of recovery services that are available to them, and then funding it. This is one place where I hope that we could find a lot of agreement across the political spectrum. I would love to have more drug treatment on demand, and we should also be talking more about scalable outpatient treatment, doing more to get people into the arms of the recovery community. And this is one other mantra that I've been talking about now, coming up on 3 years. Next month will be my 3-year anniversary here on the board. The more we can do to get people into the arms of the recovery community, the more taxpayer dollars we will save, because people in the recovery community look out for each other. It's a repeater effect, and it really is a value add that if we can get people there, they'll have each other's back. Because I will tell you, God forbid, if it happens that the right hot guy asks me to party this weekend and I go out on I've made bad decisions before. If God forbid I were to relapse, it's going to be my recovery community and friends and social support that's going to save me. And I think that's an important lesson that the public health community needs to learn. I am hoping, and actually I had a meeting with some doctors from UCSF last week, and one thing I would like to do is make sure that some of the folks who are really on the front lines of some of the really serious patients who are really struggling with homelessness and mental illness and substance use disorder, I would like for them to know that learn more about the recovery community that's out there. Because I think if we all talk to each other, we're actually a lot closer politically than, it may seem. If even now we're kind of having just some debates about what recovery means. It's almost absurd how close we are on the language, but we're still having a rancorous debate about recovery.
Well, are you going to be encouraging people to go to the meeting and join in?
Yes, I would.
Right,
so
let's talk about that.
It is the Public Safety and Neighborhood Services Community. It is Thursday, April 24th. It's at 10 a.m., room 250 in City Hall. And I would encourage people to express their opinion about it. For or against, obviously I'm for. But I hope that people will understand that this is not an effort to ban harm reduction. If anything, I think this is something that people need to hear. San Franciscans need to know that our drug policy is aspiring to something that is the same thing they would wish for a loved one or family member. When we have a drug policy that is aimed at accomplishing for everybody what we would want for someone we love, then we will have a drug policy worthy of the city of St. Francis.
Great. Supervisor Dorsey, thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, see you Thursday. Thanks so much.
Yep.
Absolutely.
See you there.
Take care. Bye-bye. Okay, so that was Supervisor Matt Dorsey. We also have some other great guests here talking about drug policy, namely Mothers Against Drug Addiction and Deaths, Gina McDee and Jackie Berlinn. They're here today to talk about what they've been doing. Let's hand over the floor to you. Whichever one wants to speak first.
Yeah, this is Jackie of Mothers Against Drug Addiction and Deaths, and thank you so much for having us here. And we, McDee as Mothers Against Drug Addiction and Deaths, we stand firmly in support of Supervisor Dorsey's Recovery First ordinance because we believe it offers a target for lasting change, as well as embracing multiple paths to recovery. I think people are misunderstanding, thinking that maybe medically assisted treatment is going to go away. But no, that's part of, one of the multiple paths to recovery, while still keeping recovery as the goal. I think it's a great ordinance because it allows us to have a trajectory and an end goal for each individual that is struggling with addiction in San Francisco. And I can speak as a mother of a son who is addicted to fentanyl on the streets of San Francisco.
Oh my.
And he has not felt hopeful that San Francisco wants him to recover. I have taken him multiple times to try and get him into recovery, only to be turned away. And I've seen others that are addicted on the streets start to lose hope that the city even wants recovery as the end goal for them. If you ask my son and any of his friends, they do not want this life of addiction. And just as Supervisor Dorsey said, someone pulled him out of this. That's exactly what we need to do for these people. My son was recently in jail, and he told me, he said, "Mom, please don't let me go back. Don't let me go back to the streets." He wants to be pulled out of this. And what we've found in San Francisco is that the tools that we need aren't readily there. And it's really frustrating. So the fact that Supervisor Dorsey wants to have a target and a goal for the entire city of San Francisco and the nonprofits and the legislature and the leaders of the city to focus on recovery first is a huge step in putting hope front and center.
And it's so modest. It's one of these things. I was listening to what Supervisor Dorsey was saying. I've read the legislation, and I do support it. But it is not radical. This is about it's pretty basic stuff. I would go a lot further, if it were me. But, so I think this is really interesting that the steps toward the rational approach to this is monumental here in San Francisco, and everybody does deserve that kind of warm embrace of somebody who genuinely cares and is going to pull them out. So it's about time.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I do want to go on record as saying that Mothers Against Drug Addiction and Death does support harm reduction. I do believe in clean needles and, safety measures. But I think that money needs to be put into recovery first and foremost.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
All right. I'll be a little...
Hi, Gina.
Hi, I'm Gina. Jackie and I are a part of Mothers Against Drug Addiction and Death. We're going to just call it my dad. It's way too long of a name. Anybody to be against this, it to me is astonishing, especially public health officials. We all should want people to get better, right? And as far as the harm reduction goes, when we say we are in favor of harm reduction, I'm going to say personally, as a recovering addict, God willing, next week I'll have 13 years. I believe absolutely in medication-assisted treatment. I believe in needle exchange. I believe in Narcan. I believe in all those things. I don't believe that we need to walk around and hand out pipes and foil and straws to people literally laying on the pavement, some with legs amputated, and think that that is okay. We don't even require them to get up off of the sidewalk and walk to the corner to get supplies. My daughter was part of this whole thing. She was out there on the street in a tent, didn't have to leave the spot she sat on. She was 50 feet from her dealer, and people delivered tents, pipes, straws, foil, food, medical care, haircuts, you name it. There was zero incentive for her to get better. Zero incentive. She was lucky. I mean, I'm going to say she was lucky. She's one of the ones who had a family member close by who could go and pull her out of that, right? We call that intervention. It was a very brutal intervention, but it happened. There are so many out there that are lost and have no one to advocate for them. I just believe that for so long, we've made it, I mean, it's a destination spot. My daughter didn't set up a tent over here in the East Bay, right? In our little neighborhood, because she couldn't, because it's not allowed, because she'd get arrested. She knew where to go. She knew where to go and what to do. They've made it far too hard to get help and far too easy to get high. And I'm glad to see the change happening. I'm thrilled to see some change.
Do you feel that there is a change? I mean, I asked Matt Dorsey the same question, is like, do you feel a shift in people's attitudes? I mean, for me, it seems like there's this kind of post-COVID reaction against the standard, the status quo. Things seem to be changing. It's a different attitude toward the so-called experts, toward what people tell you is the right thing to do. It seems like this sort of energized atmosphere for a completely different approach, or maybe even a looking at it with new eyes, going, wow, this isn't working. We just have another month of increased overdoses.
Yeah, so I agree with you, Erica. I think that the recovery community has gotten a lot more vocal. We see our people out there dying, right? As someone that's been there and you see this happening, you know that it's possible. And you know the joy and just the freedom you feel having left that. I mean, and it's hard to get out, it is. But having left that behind and being on the other side, I think we're speaking up more. I think more of us are coming to the table and saying, hey, listen to us, right? I love the doctors. I love all those people. But sitting behind a desk, looking at your stats, is really not being in the mix. And we say each one teach one. Each one teach one. It takes an addict to help an addict. And I just think the recovery community is really starting to show up.
And how is Mayor Lurie in this for you? Have you met with him?
Oh, absolutely. So,
you want to talk about that?
Sure. We met with him before he was elected. I met with him long before he was even running. He was kind of doing research and meeting with people and wanted to see what was going on. He sat and listened to our stories. All of us moms, listened to us cry, listened to us beg. It was pretty amazing. We met with all, and then the fentanyl state of emergency was thrilling for us. We believe that, I said this in a meeting in a public comment, that 4,000 deaths, 4,000 body bags, should amount to an emergency. So go ahead, Jackie.
I was just going to second what you were saying about Mayor Lurie listening to us. He has a huge heart, and he really asked a lot of questions and was trying to understand the situation. And as Gina said, it was, prior to him even running, he wanted to learn what the problems in San Francisco are. And this was the drug addiction and homelessness issue was first and foremost on his mind. And he did his research by seeking out people who are in the middle of it and people who were experiencing it with their family members. And when I told him, my story and my situation, he was very, very sensitive to that. And he really wanted to see change. He understands that and wants to help families who are struggling with loved ones that are on the streets. And he's actually we've been watching him, and then when he went ahead and when he ended up getting elected, we were thrilled. And then he actually started doing the things that he said he was going to do, like Gina said, declaring the fentanyl a state of emergency, which we also fully supported, and trying to break down silos between a lot of the the establishments in the city, between law enforcement and harm reduction and the leaders in the city, getting real conversations going between everybody. And again, Dorsey's ordinance is a target for all of these once siloed groups to focus on and head towards.
Wow.
What kind of headwinds do you think he's going to face, when it comes right down to it? I mean, there's still a bit of a honeymoon phase, but do you think people like Jackie Fielder, are going to, granted he has a friendlier board than Mayor Breed did,
Right.
but how much pushback do you think he'll be getting from Department of Public Health, the Coalition on Homelessness, and people like that?
Yeah, I think he's going to get, he will get some significant pushback. And I think it's mostly because they don't understand completely that we're a lot close together than they realize. I think some fear that this is going to increase stigma around the, the drug community, but his Recovery First ordinance actually embraces harm reduction as a crucial entry point to care. No one's going to be turned away, and it's just simply the goal of cessation. It's about long-term well-being, not condemnation, not stigmatizing these people. It's not about judgment, and it's about hope. It recognizes that there's going to be setbacks, but there's a firm aim for a life free from addiction. And I think that those people who are going to push against this, if they really listen to what Supervisor Dorsey is saying, they will see that it's just absolute common sense.
After years of covering, the supervisors and the board meetings, my fear is, or I guess my prediction is there will be a small but vocal group of people who show up and try to twist it into something it isn't, and scream and yell and hold up their little handwritten posters. I'm looking at you, Jennifer Friedenbach, and
I'd like
that
to
I,
comment on that. We would all love to be there. The people in the recovery community, there's, a lot of people show up. A lot of us love to be there, but a lot of us have jobs, right? So in the middle of the day,
Exactly.
middle of the day thing's kind of hard. They took away the phone call. Can't do that anymore. But hey, speak out for what you believe in. I think it's great. You do what you got to do.
The other thing that needs to be put in, if you can't show up at the meeting, you can still send an email. You can still call your supervisor, etc.
1,000%. Yeah, 1,000%. We wrote a response. Well, we wrote a letter in favor of Dorsey's support, but also answered some of the questions. I encourage everybody to go look on Legistar and look at this letter that the Drug Policy Alliance from New York wrote, and a lot of these organizations here in the city signed on to that don't believe in Recovery First, apparently, and want to change the language of what recovery is.
To what?
Well, to include that it's the journey, right? The journey, you can be still using, but be in recovery because you're wanting to be in recovery. And I'm not trying to be combative or snarky here. This is how they see it. So let's say I'm microdosing. If you don't know what microdosing is, I'm still using fentanyl, but I'm going to get my methadone in the morning. And, I'm trying to get off slowly but surely. And I think that's wonderful. And I think that is a path to recovery. I think once you've been in recovery, and I'm not touting myself or anybody else, I'm saying once you've embraced being free and abstaining from illicit drugs, it's a freedom from the bondage of hell that is so liberating. And I wish that so much for people. I really do, because it's hell. I mean, I went through absolute hell. I lost my kids. I lost my house. I lost my dignity.
I'm actually looking for, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, I mean, for me, it took handcuffs in a mental institution, right? For somebody else, it could take 6 months in a facility. I don't care how you get there, but getting there is just very freeing.
Well, we're glad you were able to make that journey and head home and arrive home.
And your daughter.
Yeah, she's got about three and a half years now.
That's great.
That's amazing. My father is an alcoholic, and he never, quit. And it's an addiction. It's a drug. And, I basically watched a healthy, athletic man who coach, but still had a little bit of alcohol every day, just a little, even if it was just a little bit. He never could leave it behind.
Yeah, my dad, same thing, Susan. Every day of my life, my father was inebriated and died of this. My brother passed away 2 years ago now from this. My other brother's probably going to die from this. It's rough. It's rough.
Yeah, it really is. Growing up as a kid in Southern California and in Hawaii and in Northern California, I was really surprised by the ubiquity of drugs of one type or another. And we have. I've never had to deal with addiction myself, but I've seen what it's done to other people, including friends, from alcohol right on down. And it masks who those people really are in a really devastating way, I found.
I agree. And I'm going to say, I love Matt, Supervisor Dorsey, love him to death. I'm going to disagree with him on the safe consumption. It may work in Europe. Europe doesn't have fentanyl. They also don't have, myriads of homeless people and like we have here. The conditions aren't the same. There's no comparison.
There's no comparison. They arrest people.
Yeah, I tend to think one of the issues that I keep, maybe I'm just being a reductionist and comparing this with other issues like transit, transit first versus, cars, prosecuting misdemeanors versus letting them go. There's a whole range of issues that you can sort of look at, and you'll see that our political establishment, as it were, the policy establishment, a lot of those groups seem to take a view that's really based on, well, first there's clientelism, which is basically clientelism to some is sort of a more polite term of talking about political corruption, but basically it's sort of scratching, it's sort of this political reciprocity that groups have to do in order to get things passed and approved. It's also about path dependence, which is this, you just keep going where you're going and you don't want to change at all. And it gets to the point where you end up with a bunch of people who have been in place for years or decades, and they don't want to see any change because they figure from their end the policy works because they're still getting their budget allocations, they still have their authority, but they aren't necessarily looking at the results of what works. And anytime anything new is introduced, they become very, very defensive.
Yes.
Because they think they think in terms of pies and limited goods, that there's only a piece of the budget pie. And in some cases that's true. They're going to lose a little bit of the budget pie. Well, maybe they deserve to. Maybe they need to look outside and see that the policies haven't been working as well as they should. And
yeah, do they walk down the street? That's always that.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty big test. What are they seeing when they walk down the street?
Well, it's an interesting question, and I'm listening to Jackie and Gina and Matt, and then here we are, Susan, Mike, me. We have to our job, right, is to report almost as neutrally as we can. We have to get the facts, get the information out, and then not at least not present an opinion unless you're doing an op-ed. But so you're kind of walking this weird line. I have to have an outlet, I think, sometimes for my anger, because what you see is so tremendously inhumane, and for the individual, for the people around them, and for the city as a whole. And you think, I get vibrating with anger, about how we have allowed this and how we have condoned it with the nodding of the people in charge, the Department of Public Health, the Drug Policy Alliance, people on the fringes. And you think, how did we get to this point? It's not okay. It's not okay for anybody. And I feel we're pulling back. I do. But like the emotion involved in all of this, like I'm listening to Matt, and I also really like Matt, like him as a human. I'm thinking, oh no, we need to go farther than this. I want to have a recovery center on every corner. I want mash tents. I want, I have to tell you, I did call the number, the Department of Public Health number that they have on their website. Are you ready for recovery? And it's just not good enough. It's not, people aren't jumping to attention in order to, if somebody calls, they should be at the ready. And instead, it still is this, well, you got to show up at this place and you have to wait for it to open and it could be closed by the time. And it is inefficient. It is still highly bureaucratic. It feels like it's put together with spit and bubble gum. So you
sound like you're describing coordinated entry, which is the
same.
The entry vector for homelessness services. So.
Honestly, recovery should be as simple as walking into a cafe and ordering a cup of coffee. You ask for it, you get it. It should be that simple. That's what we should be worrying.
That's what a lot of people in the establishment say that they support, treatment on demand. That was a big political buzzword for a long time. Okay. Treatment on demand.
They're also saying that treatment, well, I'll say this. The Department of Public Health counts in their statistics that handing someone a strip of Suboxone on the street is treatment. They tick that as a treatment, person entering treatment. I'm just going to tell you, it's not. Handing someone, a strip of Suboxone until they can go enter a treatment facility, should not count as a stat, should count as a medication start. But it is convoluted. It is the heart, even with, ask Jackie. Corey says he's ready, and she is there and jumping through hoops.
Yes.
Now imagine all
Yeah,
the
because
people,
that's what a mom does.
yeah, but now imagine
that's what a loving person does.
But now imagine all the people that don't have an advocate for them, whose only advocate is someone that walks up to them and hands them a pipe and says, "I'm here when you're ready." It's wonderful and sweet and huggy and lovey and all that good stuff. Sounds wonderful. But when did the word intervention become so bad?
Yeah.
Right.
Because it's,
And Gina and Jackie, what has been happening with your son?
So he is he's on methadone right now. Was quite the battle to get that happening, but that is happening. But he's continuing to microdose with fentanyl on the streets. He and he says he wants to get into recovery. So I mean, he just got out of jail a couple weeks ago, and I tried to. There was just a whole mess with his. I was trying to coordinate with his public defender, and she had a lot of things messed up, and the time and the dates and stuff. So I was there, and he wasn't there, and then he was there, and I wasn't there. It was just a mess. But anyway, he got out, and I wasn't able to pick him up because I wasn't given the proper information. So he says that he's trying to change the people that he's hang around with. He's trying to change his mindset, but honestly, I mean, he needs more support. He needs more, emotional support. He doesn't have housing. He tries to get housing, and he has to jump through lots of hoops to get, a place to stay as well. And it's very hard to stay sober in the winter months when it's incredibly cold outside and it's 2:00 in the morning, your methadone's starting to wear off and your dealer's right there, and you just don't want to be cold anymore and feel lonely anymore. So.
And what about programs like the Salvation Army? I mean, it seems like they don't have quite the funding they should to. I think they could take more people, but they just don't get the kind of big budget that some of these other organizations get, like Health Right 360.
You know what?
That's very true. And I think Harbor Lights is, an excellent program. But like you say, Gina, go ahead.
I'll say that I have never not been able to get somebody into Harbor Lights. They may be full. If I pick up the phone, I mean, mind you, I know people there, but there's always an entry point. It's never a wait and see. But not everybody wants to go to Harbor Lights. A lot of people like to go to Health Right 360. It's a lot looser type of a situation. We've seen the headlines out of there, so we know. And I'm trying to be careful here, but and please don't think that as moms we don't hold our kids responsible. Believe me, we do. We're not saying that everybody else is to blame. That's not the case, because if that were the case, our kids will never get into recovery. You have to take accountability, right? You have to take accountability. So we're not saying that. We're just saying you have to make it easier to get help than it is to get high.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. The addiction team at San Francisco General is A+. They are absolutely amazing. They were wonderful with my son, and it's kind of a handoff from San Francisco General to Health Right 360 that kind of threw him off track once. But yes, I agree with Gina. I mean, absolutely, it has to be on, Corey too. He needs to make some of the effort too. He can call me up and tell me, Mom, take me to Harbor Lights, and I will get him in there, and the fact that he hasn't done that is on him as well. But
yeah, you have to want it. I mean, there's just no way around it.
And I want to remind people, we were talking earlier about looking at Legistar and the file on this. It looks like there's a lot of good correspondence in support of this ordinance, including from a certain commissioner who was speaking at our last episode in support of Supervisor Dorsey's ordinance. But if you look at the letters and correspondence from opponents, they are really organized, and they've got names and logos of multiple organizations: Drug Policy Alliance, National Harm Reduction Coalition, Underbelly, Gubbio Project, Sky Watchers, Harvey Milk Club, all lined up, all their ducks in a row, saying we are a consensus, we are a majority, when in fact they are not.
There's one thing that they are is organized. They're very, very organized. And, Drug Policy Alliance has got a lot of money. A lot of money. We're a 100% volunteer organization. We do this on our free. We've never gotten, contrary to what people think, we've never gotten paid to do anything. We take donations so that we can hold events like our annual Overdose Awareness Day event. We have events where we hold support groups and get-togethers for mothers who are in the same situation. But we're a 100% volunteer organization that doesn't get paid for this. And most, I would say most of us, these mom groups are. It's
Yeah, and can I just make one point about that? Is that there's a reason why often during these daytime hearings, you don't see representation from people like the moms, because they're working at their jobs, and the very people that accuse groups like yours of being funded are actually the ones being funded and show up with their handmade signs, lined up behind Jennifer Friedenbach to speak, about how dangerous recovery is. So there's a real hypocrisy there that is, as a opinion columnist, I've written about many, many times. I just described them as the marketing department for homelessness and drug addiction, because that's pretty much, what they've always been. They make the signs and they buy the Sharpies, and then they complain that, oh yeah, you're getting funded by billionaires, when in reality, I've done the story about how much Health Right 360 has in the bank, and the fact they pay over 9 people on their board, over $300,000, between $200,000 and $300,000, over $300,000 a year. So it's very hypocritical, in my opinion, to call out actual people who have been through this and have families going through this. It's just hypocrisy. It's just,
But it's also very hard work trying to convince people that something that is not rational is rational. You have to be organized. You have to get your message together. Normal people, and I'm just going to put normal people, the vast majority of people, you look at a situation like drug addiction and recovery, most people will come to the conclusion people who are addicted to drugs, are living on the street, are having a horrendous time in life, that recovery is the answer. I mean, it just makes sense. Most people do have family members who have or loved ones who are in those same situations. So you kind of fall back on that. Well, it just makes, we know we're right. We know that it makes sense, but it's the other side that really needs to be sharp on it, at every meeting. They need to get the money together. Because it's a lot of work to try and convince people that black is white.
It's exhausting. It's exhausting to do the opposite.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So I hate to be the mean timekeeper, but it's 6:53 already. So Gina and Jackie, I wanted to thank you very much for your participation, and obviously you can feel free to hang out and comment as we take whatever time we're able to still have left, and maybe we'll go over, if we are able to, and talk about Mayor Lurie's 100 days, first 100 days speech, which Erica was our reporter there for, or she was there and was at the speech, and she can give her impressions about what's going on.
Yeah, you bet. It was a fascinating, I would say 100 Days of Lurie. I'm sure that's not the official title, but, it was really interesting to sit there and to look around and to see the difference in the crowd. It hit me the other day. I was thinking, I've been through so many mayors. I know, Susan, you have, and Mike, you have, and each mayor has their own flavor. And this is a brand new flavor. Haven't tasted this one before. And I think what rises to the top of this for me is I haven't heard a passion for families in a long time. Maybe not ever. There was a lot of mention of making San Francisco into a kind of a family-friendly and open to kind of all ages, all demographics environment. Whatever you want to say about London Breed, you certainly can, but that was never a focus. In fact, I remember going to a State of the City address, and it was this big fanfare. And it was very bold and very loud and very enthusiastic. And I wanted to kind of elbow the person next to me. I'm like, is she ever going to talk about families? And why that's so important is because if you're not vested, if you don't value the families that you have here, they're going to go. And if you don't value young people who make put their roots here, they're not going to. So I thought that was a big difference. There was an emphasis almost on that sort of homey feel of a city, which I thought was really fascinating.
He certainly had an interesting perspective in terms of trying to put out there that a lot of the things he's doing are new, that he's going to be pragmatic, and he's going to try lots of new things, although some people have observed, including us, that many of the policies that he's putting through right now are in many ways continuations of the previous mayor, London Breed's policies. For instance, this upzoning that some people are up in arms about.
Well, okay, wait, but let's stop there. There's two. I'm just going to break this upzoning, YIMBYism, and urbanism into two separate camps. Okay, so we have we'll say the urbanists or the YIMBYs, right? You've got the builders, can see the abundance thing and all of that. For better or worse, it is a moderate, can even be on the right. Then you've got the other side, the other biking urbanist YIMBY in their own way that's on the left. And where does Mayor Breed, my goodness. Where does Mayor Lurie fall when it comes to those decisions? It's not on the left. It's not that social housing, public banking, public thing. It is more on that sort of, trying to find a good word for it.
Supply-based.
Supply-based.
But he's calling it something like, what is he calling it, Mike? Something different than upzoning.
Family-friendly housing or family zoning.
Yeah. Family zoning.
And in many ways, this basically dovetails. It may be a little bit accelerated compared with what Breed and some of the other supervisors were doing. But, if you read the legislation, it's got a lot of, it's got the fourplex legislation from that Supervisor Mandelman did baked in. It's based on the whole issue of general density and which neighborhoods have more opportunities that Myrna Melgar took the lead on a couple of years ago. So in many ways, it's very incremental and very much based on past policy. And it's kind of like he's taking the best of what he saw of that and is sort of accelerating it.
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing. I'm not seeing a pandering to kind of either side of the extremes. Look, let's face it. Building a couple stories on an existing building is, in general, not a controversial perspective. Building a 90-story building in the Sunset is. Or taking an entire building, an office building, and turning it into low-income housing, So it's more of a middle ground with this.
You have to, and again, I definitely have said I've been impressed so far with how little he seems to care about, when people get angry at what he's doing, which is, Mayor Breed talked a lot about that stuff with big talk, but she didn't do pretty much anything. Now, granted, he has a friendlier board, but he is coming in as a sort of an outsider and saying, hey, I don't really care. I'm doing this. This is what I'm going to do. But getting it done still involves a whole lot of stuff. Planning department is still a wreck. It is going to be years and years before much of what he's doing or wants to do takes effect. And so I guess as an opinion columnist, my sort of sweet spot in watching all of this is how long does it take for people to say, okay, you said you were going to do this. It's not done. I'm done with you. There's very little patience left in San Francisco after the mess that it's been in for all of these years. I think that, it's a great thing to talk about building housing. It's a whole other thing to actually 100%. Do it. And that's the biggest thing I see is going to be a big impediment for him, is that you can't fix the planning department overnight, and you can't get the Telegraph Hill dwellers to get jobs so they can't show up at those daytime meetings.
Well, it's not only that, but if you go back to other areas of policy, like homelessness, he's got this policy to get 2,500 shelter beds in how long?
2 years, 1,500 in 6 months. That's coming up in July.
So that is something that, despite the hole in my brain not being able to remember those exact words, we are monitoring. Trust me. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be. I tend to think that in many ways the honeymoon is already over with him, and people are starting. This budget that's coming up is going to be one of the big. Yeah, it's going to be brutal because. For instance, you might end up with things that he may have to do to compromise. Say, for instance, Joe Longardio does get recalled. He gets to appoint whoever, he gets to appoint a replacement. We like to think that he'll appoint somebody who is going to be, totally on board. He's going to be sort of like the perfect candidate, like Joe Longardio, but, not letting himself get beat to death by the supporters of this fake park. But what if he feels that he'll have to appoint someone that labor supports for that seat because he wants to show some amity during the budget process? It's all of these things and choices that we don't know if he's going to have those yet. He doesn't know if he's going to have to be faced with those choices yet as he goes up this hill.
The other thing, too, that people need to understand when they say, well, he doesn't need the money, he doesn't have to kowtow to people. It's not about the money, it's about keeping the power. And in order to keep the power, you have to play with the other power brokers. And so, for example, the labor unions that didn't support him, they still don't. But they're going to play nice to get what they want. What they want isn't necessarily what the city needs. So therefore, he needs to walk that line between what the city wants and needs and what labor wants and needs and what he is willing to give up to get things from labor and vice versa. Those are the things that people who don't, follow politics, who aren't journalists who have sat in 100 or 1,000 meetings and watched the arguments between, people don't understand the nuance that comes into this. And so, someone said to me, so-and-so would be a great district, supervisor if Joel gets recalled. And then I just simply pointed out, why that will never happen? Because they don't have the connections, they don't have labor behind them, they don't have this, they don't have that. There's so much nuance to how people get their jobs. And it takes often years to build, even in Matt Dorsey's case, years to build up that resume. It's very rare that you just walk into a supervisor job. You basically have to campaign for years to get it. And that usually is the case with mayor. And so that's why his becoming mayor, and I'm still going to, I like what I see so far, but I'm still going to say he ran a dirty campaign and he bought the election. And has he done a good job so far? I've been impressed so far. But does that mean that all of the things he's proposing are going to happen? Probably not.
And the other thing you have to look at is, if you look at the experience with Bloomberg in New York, he did a lot of great things. There was a lot of resentment because of the way he ran, the fact that he basically also bought, Bloomberg also bought that election. And
yes.
He was almost getting ready to buy himself a third term, or did he? I think he did serve 3 terms. So, but in many ways, the other political forces in New York sort of treated him as this interregnum, that they were just going to sit around, bide their time, and let him do his things. And then when he disappears, the same old Chinola comes back and does the same thing, as we've witnessed in New York, City
right.
lately. With the election of Eric Adams, and frighteningly, the fact that he's now cooked up, he's now in this deal with Donald Trump. Donald Trump is so pragmatic, is that he'll reach out to everybody as long as they're corrupt, regardless of party affiliation. He'll reach out to Blago, he reaches out to Eric Adams. But, and so a lot of that stuff comes back because those interests are still there.
Yeah, I agree. And I just think, as someone who's watched mayors for years, I just feel people don't 100% understand how easy it is to say you're going to upzone and how hard it is to actually upzone. And the one advantage that I do see is, of course, in District 3, you've got Danny Souter. For the first time in 2 decades, Aaron Peskin doesn't have a say. He's trying to, through his group, the Telegraph Hill Dwellers, which he started to advocate for keeping building out of his district, and he's continuing to try to wield that power. I think their power has lessened a great deal. The fact that for the first time, either he or a patsy of his is not in office with Danny Souter is going to be somewhat delicious for people that have watched him advocate building in every neighborhood but his own for 2 decades, if Danny manages to get some things approved there. But let's remember that because of Aaron Peskin, only 2 buildings have been built since he took office in Telegraph Hill.
All the more reason why it's important to watch what happens in District 4. I know so many people are ambivalent about Joel. I can't bring myself to defend him at this point because of what's happened. But at the same time, who is going to be the alternative to Joel? And, when Forrest Lou first came on our program, he's been writing for us. When he first came on to our spaces, he talked about how Anthony Lung is being groomed by Labor and Peskin to be to appear to be a consensus candidate and actually be likely be under the thumb of Labor and Peskin. And he may very well win that race, or he may very well appeal to someone who wants to make some kind of compromise and get appointed. Or if the mayor appoints the wrong person who's not politically savvy enough, he could end up beating that person in the regular election. And then, the pro-housing, pro-moderate, pro-peace, pro-prosperity slate that you have on the board of supervisor, majority that you have on the board, is no longer there.
Because it's a very delicate balance as it is, and some of the people are on either, I wrote the story when they first got put in place, the new board, and said, is this really a moderate board? I'm still up in the air on whether or not it is. It is on certain things, not on others. So, yeah, I think be careful what you wish for is also something to say in politics, because, I think we have multiple factions. We have the maximalists, who are the people that only believe in biking and think all cars should die, and even Waymo should be, get rid of them all. And then you have, the abundant people who want to see, cars go away, roads get closed. I mean, there's so many factions fighting for power right now that it just remains to be seen, who gets a piece of Lurie's time. He's been known to be quite vindictive, and certainly groups like Grow SF are doing their darndest to appeal to him and get back in his good graces. How much that matters, along the way, is going to be an interesting show.
Very much so. Any other last thoughts, or it's 7:09 right now? Hello.
I have a really quick last thought. maybe one of these times you guys can do a spot on permanent supportive housing and the overdose deaths inside them.
Yeah, that's a big issue.
Yes.
A big issue that was sort of brought into really public view during COVID, that's for sure.
I'm doing a lot of work on it, and it's just astounding to me.
Yeah.
It's
We will talk offline, Gina, because that is in my queue, particularly with regard to what I've been getting sent to me from my passion is animal advocacy and the emails that I'm being sent about that, and of course watching JJ Smith photograph more body bags coming out of Home Rise, and we all know that Randy Shaw has umpteenth decades of $500 million worth of contracts, and somehow seems to be made a hero when am I the only one who sees what a disaster Tenderloin Housing Clinic is? I mean, how is it possible that that we're the only ones that see it?
Randy's gonna call me now that he said
I'll just say that a couple of the organizations that signed on to that opposition of Supervisor Dorsey's ordinance that run permanent supportive housing, one of them has 70 overdose deaths in their housing. 70. Wow. So to oppose a recovery ordinance, to me, is despicable.
Exactly.
That is, yeah. And so let's we'll talk offline, but let's work on I'd love your help on the story I'm writing with some of the information that you've been gathering, because I'm working on a piece about that very thing, and it just, to me, I just don't understand. I've written about this so many times, but today it really struck me that I needed to move it up in the queue when I saw the standard 100 put Randy in there like he was some kind of hero, and of course that thing was so bizarre I couldn't tell if it was basically if it was all jokes or if some of it was serious. But I just personally don't see how he's continued to get no bid contracts for decades and decades, extended out into 2048.
He's been a voice for reform in recent years.
Yes, but it doesn't transfer to the buildings he's running. That's my biggest problem. I just turned over a case to Animal Care and Control that is despicable, something that's going on in one of his buildings. And, you can't be breeding dogs and selling them to dog fighters in Oakland so that you can buy drugs and say that you're, providing housing that is working for supportive housing. It's just, it's definitely not.
That's a story I'm definitely going to want to read.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. And speaking of housing, you recently did a story about another one of the more prominent nonprofit housing providers in the city, the Chinatown CDC, and their director, and the problems that they have now that are out in the open now. And
yes,
being a resident of District 3, having to deal with the politics of the east side of the city and affordable housing politics, Chinatown CDC is a big heavyweight in terms of political power, almost as much as, they'll probably say more than or just as, but almost as much as, say, Todco and some of the others in terms of path-dependent policies. So what did you discover in that article, which is at the Voice of San Francisco as we speak?
Well, the Malcolm Young, who's the Malcolm Young, who's the head of the Chinatown Community Development Center, has had an ethics violation filed, and as we all know, anybody can file an ethics violation with the commission. But in this case, there is also a lawsuit and an independent audit to back it up, and that independent audit by Lindquist, Von Heusen, and Joyce LLP indicate there are blind spots. Managing individual could use, quote, one of the organization's 29 affiliated LLCs for self-enrichment, and Young is the sole manager member of 18 of the 29 LLCs overseen by this organization, CCDC. So that's the other thing I found in public records was a 2022 lawsuit against him and other managing members alleging that he diverted income, revenue, and profits from those other entities to themselves, used them for conduits for their personal business, property, and affairs. And those claims are substantiated pretty much in that independent auditor's report from 2024. He has numerous alter ego entities, according to the lawsuit, and those are being used to enrich himself and others as part of that organization, which, as you know, has millions of dollars and, pays him very handsomely. But I think, again, what we're coming into here is just that story of, too big to fail and too big to be taken out. Yeah, too big to go to jail. I mean, not that it hasn't happened, because we all know it has. But in this case, it seems like, from what I hear, after that article came out, they're lawyering up. And I mean, no one has shed light on it, which is kind of surprising to me. But then again, it was surprising no one shed light on Nauru, Dwayne Jones, and Harlan Kelly either. But it's a developing story that seems to have some real meat behind it in the stuff that I've read through. And, that's a very big organization, and it'd be very, very easy to hide and move money around in shell organizations within that organization, especially if you have the main guy overseeing the majority of those other LLCs.
Did you talk to Mark Farrell about CCDC and some of their practices?
No, I didn't.
Might want
no,
to,
not yet.
Simply because when in his last term as supervisor, he had tried to deal with some of their situations, like things involving evictions, and which is always maddening when you hear about affordable housing providers, and especially supportive housing providers, evicting their tenants, and it doesn't seem like they're giving them any better of a standard than the market rate housing. It's like, if they're doing it that way, why are we paying them?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, and the fact that Young remains the sole manager of 18 of the 29 CCDC-controlled LLCs, and he's also, by the way, the agent or service agent or contact for 10 of the 11 remaining entities. That's pretty damning. And by the way, his Fair Practice Political Practices Commission form, the 700 form, which is his statement of economic information, between 2019 and the present, doesn't disclose any of those entities. So that's also very suspicious.
Oh boy. Okay.
Yeah.
So it is coming on to 7. It's 7:17 right now, and I don't want to keep you guys, because some of you haven't eaten dinner yet. And I have to make a confession.
Yes.
I've been eating my dinner all the time while so I'm hoping that no eating-related sound shot in the recording of this show. I did want to mention that there are a couple of events that people might want to be aware of this week. April 24th, which I believe is Thursday, the San Francisco Democratic Party is having a event against fentanyl. They're partnering with United Players. It's going to be at 1044 Howard Street, April 24th at 4 p.m. They're going to be talking. You're going to hear talks from Democratic Party leaders, families of victims, and community leaders, followed by a march through the neighborhoods most impacted by fentanyl. And then also there is on Wednesday, the 23rd, the San Francisco Republican Party is apparently hosting Steve Hilton, who is this British guy who came from nowhere, as far as I know, and has been mentioned as a challenger to a challenger to whoever succeeds Gavin Newsom for the governor's job.
I've been hearing his name quite a bit. There's so many Hiltons, I'm never sure who's related to whom, but I have heard his name. Yes.
The world of television, which, as far as I'm concerned, doesn't evoke confidence. But what can you do?
And if you believe in the Recovery First Ordinance and would like to talk about it to the Board of Supervisors or the committee, 10 a.m., room 250 on Thursday, City Hall, the 24th.
Exactly.
Yes. And again, if you can't go, please do, send your letters and phone calls to your supervisor to let them know where you stand on it.
Anything else anyone wants to talk about before we sign off?
Oh, just visit The Voice. The Voice on X is at The Voice, at the VOSF. And at the VOSF? Yes, at the VOSF.
Or the
is our website.
And we have both of them.
Yes, and you can then also sign up for our newsletter, make a donation. We are a nonprofit, 501c3, so we are 100% tax write-offable. And Gina, where can people go to visit the moms and make a donation to you guys?
You can find us at, madad.org. That's MADAAD.org. Or just Google Mothers Against Drug Addiction and Deaths.
And that's the same as your X handle as well.
And it's 501c3, tax deductible, and none of us get paid. We use that for support and events.
Excellent.
Okay, well, everyone, thank
Great.
you very much. I think we've done we've acquitted ourselves very well tonight.
Okay. Yes, very well.
Thank you.
And I'm going to go now and feed the dog. Thank you, everyone.
Everybody.
Good night.